and I really didn't get to go very thoroughly through these things, but in the executive branch, oh my, yeah, these shouldn't be till chapter 13. Here is the end of chapter 12. The factors that basically determine how effective the leadership is of a president. Very quickly, the factors, the 5 factors that are mentioned in the chapter are the force of circumstance. And if you remember your reports on the alignments of the political parties, a lot of time, or several times, well, 2 times to be exact, in those 4 realignments, 2 presidents had very unfavorable circumstances which caused their party to lose the next election. And that was the Hoover presidency being affected by the Great Depression, and the presidency in 1893, that president is escaping me, but he was blamed for that financial crash of 1893. So if there are some very, if there is a circumstance that would be considered very significant, that can affect the level of, or that can affect how people would perceive the leadership of a president. An example that the book gave was President Kennedy began his presidency with a disastrous Bay of Pigs fiasco, where they tried to send in Cuban-trained mercenaries to overthrow Castro, and it failed. And so Kennedy didn't start out very good, but later he had a great victory in the Cuban Missile Crisis against Russia, and that caused his popularity to soar. So the force of circumstances will be a factor in presidential leadership. The stage of the president's term. And your textbook mentions that most presidents get a honeymoon period. They, when they first take office, Congress is more open to their policies. The public is more open to seeing how well they start out. And it's kind of a paradox that the textbook mentions, that usually when a person is in the stage when they're most inexperienced as president is when they get more grace or they get more favor. By the end of George Bush Sr.'s presidency, his approval rating had dropped greatly after the Kuwait War, the Iraqi War. Another factor that can determine if a president's leadership is considered successful or a failure is the nature of the issue. Is it a foreign issue or is it a domestic issue? President Johnson and President Nixon both had the effort of Vietnam, the non-winnable effort or the non-winnable situation of Vietnam, which would have been a foreign affair, caused them to not be very, not considered very not very strong in their leadership, because the Vietnam conflict dragged on, and it was just became evident that it was a war we could not win. Domestic issues can hurt somebody like Herbert Hoover in the Great Depression. That is domestic, that happens on our home soil. Another factor in the level of presidential leadership is the relationship with Congress. And this is where we would say that really the executive office is not the most powerful office. Congress wields more influence. And so how well a president seeks to cooperate with Congress will determine their leadership success. And then the final factor is public support. And we see this a lot with polls that ask people to rate how, or yeah, to tell how they rate the presidency, presidential approval ratings. Going back to George Bush Sr., after the Iraq War was over and we had pushed Iraq out of Kuwait, he enjoyed a 90% approval rating. So some sub-factors in this factor of public support is that today the presidency is basically televised, and especially today with social media, we always have the president and what he does or does not do before us. That's going to affect public support. What are the events and issues that the president has to deal with? And then, of course, many Americans have an illusion that government is basically run by the president. They think whoever they get in, things are going to change. But again, the president runs up against this other branch called Congress. So know these factors for the exam. They're the last main section in chapter 12. Now remember, you don't have to know for chapter 12, you want to know the 4 broad provisions that the founders gave the president. And you want to know the 4 rivers that we talked about in the evolution of the presidency. You do not have to know the 4 systems of selecting the president. That was kind of confusing. That's on page 354. So you don't have to know that. But then you do want to know, starting on page 366 through the end of the chapter, those factors right here, these factors, these 5 factors in presidential leadership. So now we'll move on to chapter 13. Is there any questions about chapter 12? Chapter 13 deals with the federal bureaucracy. Are you guys familiar with this guy here? Mr. Incredible's boss. Particularly the scene where he says, penetrating the bureaucracy. That's what we're going to talk about. Although he wasn't talking about the federal bureaucracy, he was talking about the bureaucracy of the insurance company. But we're going to talk about the federal bureaucracy. And you might be wondering, Mr. Bings, what is a bureaucracy? I'm glad you asked. The definition on page 382, 383 is a good place to look. It's a system of organization and control based on 3 principles: hierarchy. This has to do with authority. You have the heads of the bureaucracy. They're the top tier of authority, and they basically oversee those that would be in the middle part of the bureaucracy. And then you have those on the bottom. So there's a hierarchy of authority. A third thing is job specialization, right here. And usually you get people who are experts in an area. Now, these 5 things here are a guy by the name of Max Weber's 5 characteristics of bureaucracy, but we can fit them all into 3 things that the textbook mentions. Hierarchical authority, then you have job specialization, and you get experts who are to bring a professionalism to any agency of a bureaucracy. And then the third thing is formalized rules. There's a certain way that agencies in a bureaucracy are to be run. And there needs to be part of that good record keeping. So this is the system of control, and it is to be an efficient means of getting people to work together on large tasks. So we're going to go on over to page 386 and 387. And as you can guess, the bureaucracy has grown over the years. Originally, it began with about 3,000 people in 1800 when Thomas Jefferson became president. Today, there's over 2.5 million civil employees, that is, civilians who work for the federal government. over 2.5 million. These include people like the postmen and postwomen who deliver your mail, the postmaster who works at your town's post office, and you can buy stamps from them and sell packages or send packages. They are civil employees. Your IRS workers are civil employees. That is, they are civilians who work for the federal bureaucracy. Very quickly, what does a federal bureaucracy do? They administer the rules of public policy. They make rules as they're required, and they, in a sense, work as a judge. See that word adjudication? You see judge in there, adjudicate. They sometimes determine if and when rules have been followed or broken. You might have a, for example, when President Trump was being impeached, several people were brought before the impeachment. No, that's not a good example because that's that committee is made up of leaders from the government. We might take, we might take NASA. NASA is a bureaucratic agency. You might have an engineer who worked for NASA. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, and they had to have hearings on what went wrong. And the NASA agency, their investigative agency, might have had, they had several engineers come before them and determine if they, followed the rules for making sure all the systems were safe on the space shuttle. So those three tasks concerning rules are the functions that bureaucracies perform. This is where we want to pick up on page 386 and 387. 4 different types of agencies in the federal bureaucracy. The first one we want to talk about is what's known as the executive or cabinet departments. These are departments that are appointed by the president, as well as the cabinet leader. And then once the president has done that, they must be then confirmed by the Senate. You'll notice a figure on page 387 of the 15 cabinet departments in the federal bureaucracy. The oldest department is the Department of State, which was founded under George Washington's presidency. And the newest federal, the newest cabinet department was founded in 2002 during George Bush Jr., Little George's presidency right after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security. Now, the leaders of these 15 cabinets, these 15 department leaders, they make up the cabinet of the president. They are a member of the president's cabinet along with the vice president and some of the president's other key advisors. I think I have it on here. Yeah, there we go. So your textbook mentions here that the smallest cabinet department is the Department of Education, with about 4,500 employees. That's the smallest. The largest department is the Department of Defense, with over 600,000 employees. Now, what is the main building where the Department of Defense works? I'm watching. What is the main building where the Department of Defense works? It's a building that we call, basically, it's called a shape. It's a shape, and we call it that shape.
Pentagon.
Yeah, the Pentagon. That's where our Department of Defense is. So if you want to see how massive that building is, because it's got to have offices and things for 600,000 plus people. If you want to see kind of how big it is in perspective, look up after 9/11, because one of the airplanes crashed into the Pentagon, and see how big the destruction area was compared to the whole building, and you'll get a sense of how big, how massive the Pentagon is. Alrighty, back to the slides. But remember, I'm watching. Always watching. Wazowski. You guys know what movie that is?
Monsters, Inc.
Yeah, yes. My impersonation must have been halfway decent. All right, so cabinet departments. So usually the leaders of these departments are like the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, so on and so forth. Secretary of Agriculture. A second type of federal bureaucracy are the commissions. And these commissions protect public interests by making sure certain types of businesses and in industries follow those rules, right? Right up here, remember? Making sure the rules are administered and followed. They regulate, regulatory commissions. They're not like Billy the Kid and his regulators who shot people. These are commissioners who make sure you keep the rules. For example, there's a national, actually Federal Communications Commission. This commission makes sure that radio stations and television stations abide by the rules that have been set forth. a federal or a regulatory agency that's not on here but is mentioned in your book, which is one that we're all probably familiar with, is the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. They make sure that factories aren't producing too much smog and putting that in the air that we breathe. They make sure automobiles aren't producing too much carbon emissions, things like that. So basically, these regulate businesses and industries to basically keep the public, things that are in the public's best interest. This is where that agency would come in that Teddy Roosevelt helped get started, the Food and Drug Administration. We want meat factories to be sanitary. Now, you have another kind of commission. Actually, this should say agency, regulatory agency, and this should say independent agency. But you also have independent agencies. I'll get that changed before I post it. And these are similar to the cabinet departments, but they have an even narrower focus. So, for example, we have the Department of Agriculture as a cabinet department. Well, you might have an independent agency that studies just the beef industry. So it's narrower in focus. A couple examples of independent agencies. I mentioned one earlier was NASA. Here we go. NASA, the CIA, except you can see since President Clinton's administration, the CIA ranks along with the other cabinets. FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. This is the group that right now is going into Louisiana after the hurricanes and seeing if people need federal help. They're also in California and Colorado where the wildfires are burning to see if, there's going to be a lot of people that lost homes that need federal help. So you have cabinet departments, you have agencies, you do have commissions, but I've got to change this to agencies. I'll get that changed. So these are still agencies. You have government corporations. I need to move this. Up to here. There we go. Then you have government corporations. So we have cabinet departments, we have regulatory agencies, we have independent agencies, then we have government corporations, which are businesses run by the government, like the U.S. Postal Service. The U.S. Postal Service is a business that employs people and they make money. Amtrak is another government corporation. These are, they're like private corporations, except they get federal funding. Here's some of the corporations that we have, along with the Postal Service and Amtrak, Export-Import Bank, Inter-American Foundation, FDIC, which you see usually on your checks from the checking account. Has to do with banking. So those are government corporations. Okay, what I don't have on here is commissions. On the bottom of page 388 of your textbook mentions a fifth type of agency, but this is not a permanent body like these others. These are presidential commissions. Some examples were the Commission on Civil Rights, the Commission on Fine Arts. After President Kennedy was assassinated, President Johnson appointed the Warren Commission to study the assassination. Once they were done, that committee dissolved. So, or that commission dissolved. So, presidential commissions, and I'll get that added on here also. Now, here's a quick history of how the federal bureaucracy has changed in terms of how it's run. It started out like all of government by the gentleman, that is the elite. It was a calling or a duty that you provided as a service to the nation. And so if you weren't in the elite class, you weren't going to be considered to be in any government position. Now, this information's on page 390 and 391 of your textbook, but there's been different systems that have been added and tweaked over the years. What we have now is a merit system. Most of our civil servants are hired through this merit system. They have to score high on an exam, or they must have specialized training. They must have specialized training to serve in a certain agency or corporation. We're not going to put lawyers on the Department of Agriculture. We're not going to put farmers on some corporation to make sure lawyers are ethical. So your political affiliation or your loyalty to a political party are not a requirement. What you know is more important than who you know. You have to be competent for the job. That sounds like a good plan, and that is the plan that we have now. A plan that came about in the 1800s was called the patronage system. This is where you give people who supported you government jobs. So if we went, for example, with President Grant, being a Republican, when he became president, he would then have put many Republicans in positions in the federal government. It's similar. I'm not going to say it's the same as the spoil system. It's very similar. It is a type of spoil system. To the winner goes the spoils, but there was still an understanding that you needed to put people in there who knew what they were doing. In 1883, you need to know this act, the Pendleton Act of 1883. It's on page 390. It said at least 10% of the people you appoint, this is the president, at least 10% of the people that he appoints have to be based on the merit system. You can't put everybody in there based on the spoils or the patronage system. Because eventually the patronage system became the spoil system. And whereas the patronage system still kind of had a sense of, we need to put qualified people in there, the spoil system, basically, the president put in there his good friends and his cronies and his family members, and they might not have had much experience, if any at all. And when a new president comes in, basically all the appointees of the previous president are dismissed. Even if they're doing a great job, the new president will put in his friends and family, his lackeys, cronies, and they might not have any experience at all. So the Pendleton Act was really, this was getting worse, and the Pendleton Act was passed. With the progressives in the 1920s and 30s, things got a lot better. You had more than 70% of appointees being based on merit. And today, about 95% of appointees to the federal bureaucracy are based on the merit system. The last section about the bureaucracy is when you have a bureaucracy with over 2.5 million people working, and you have departments that have thousands of people in them, and you have one department like the Department of Defense up to 600,000 people, how do you keep all these agencies in line? Who keeps them accountable? These 5 things here are what keeps the bureaucracy accountable. Of course, the president, and I don't think any president has dismissed or fired as many appointees as President Trump. Congress, of course, can keep you in line as the federal bureaucracy. And of course, the Supreme Court. So all 3 branches of the government work to keep the bureaucracy under control. But then agencies within the bureaucracy can help keep other agencies under control. And then those powerful interest groups can help keep agencies under control. So that was kind of a jet tour of that last section. Make sure you read that. Are there any questions? I will have a little study guide for you tonight, telling you which sections to really focus on in each chapter. All right, if you have a question or if you're trying to think of one, let me share two things while you do that. Number one, I'm going to give you Monday to work on the test. So no class on Monday. That'll be an extra hour that you can use for the test if you need to. Also, I'm going to give you 3 extra days for the assignment that was due today. Let me pull up the module 3. Okay, the assignment on the news media broadcasts was due tonight, but I'm going to give you until November 2nd. So you got 3 more days. I've got to change that Friday to Monday. Now, even if you've already done it, the reason I'm doing this is because there's going to be a lot of good news broadcasts this weekend, you know, because we're just 4 days from the election. So if you've already turned it in, but you would like to maybe watch some different broadcasts, just let me know and I will clear your attempt. So is that clear? Okay, any questions? Any other questions?
Mr. Bings,
Yes.
so on the 4 functions, do we pick one station for each function, or do we describe them with every
No,
function?
whatever 4 you pick, if all 4 of them are doing the same function, then share that.
Okay, thank you.
But now, one way you can maybe enhance it is if all 4, let's say for example, all 4 broadcasts were using the signaling function, you might compare and say, this station was more signaling than all the other 3. This one here had some watchdog in it. You see what I'm saying? You can kind of mix it up. You're just going to
Yes.
evaluate each broadcast. And if all 4 of them are the same, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's no questions, again, you have Monday to work on your test or your assignment. So we will see you back here to begin Module 4 on Wednesday, November 4th, if the country hasn't exploded because of the election. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on next Wednesday.